Hi, Dan, Elder Millennial here. So, Sonic Blast, not 3D Blast, like on a Genesis and Saturn. It's just Sonic Blast. This was actually the last game that Sega published for Game Gear in 1996, and it's also the last 2D platformer version of Sonic that Sega made for years. With all that in mind, they've had years working on Sonic. This should be the best that the Game Gear can do. This should be the best Sonic on the Game Gear, right? Right? It shouldn't be a tech demo for some pre-rendered 3D graphics that shouldn't be on an 8-bit system, right? Because that would be silly and that wouldn't work. Why would anybody do that?
1994's Sonic Triple Trouble was a high point in the Game Gear Sonic games, but in 1995, Aspect, a developer in charge of Sonic on the Game Gear, took a detour with Tails Adventure. Tails Adventure is a unique, if somewhat polarizing game with a completely different playstyle than what we think of when it comes to traditional Sonic. By the time 1996 rolled around, only part of the Triple Trouble team returned for the final Game Gear Sonic, Sonic Blast. Just to put some things in context here. In 1996, Sega simultaneously created a fake 3D Sonic game for the Sega Saturn, the Genesis, the Game Gear, and the Master System all at once. That's spanning over 3 generations of game systems with a single release. On the Saturn and Genesis, it was called Sonic 3D Blast, and it was basically the same game. And on the Game Gear and Master System, it was just called Sonic Blast, and it was also basically the same game. And all of this is in 1996, the same year that real 3D graphics on a home console were forever revolutionized by a little game called Super Mario 64. And what Sega did here was the equivalent of if Nintendo released a version of Super Mario 64 for the NES. It's absolutely wild. With Sonic 3D Blast for the Genesis and Saturn, developer Traveler's Tales fudged their way using isometric graphics. However, Aspect went a different direction, sticking with traditional 2D perspective, but using pre-rendered 3D graphics instead of traditional sprites. Popularized by the incredible Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario RPG games, pre-rendered graphics turned high-resolution 3D figures into 2D assets. When done right, it brings a fluid motion and lushness that was once thought impossible on 2D-only hardware. When it goes wrong, it creates uncanny valley-looking characters that don't mesh with the environment. Guess which category Sonic Blast falls into? Sonic Blast is sort of impressive at first glance, with some nice looking sprites if you don't look too hard and some fun presentation moments between levels, but spend any time playing and some glaring flaws begin to show in both the visuals and the gameplay. So let's talk about that gameplay. Sonic Blast jettisons almost everything that makes Sonic fun. The platforming here is just not good. Sonic games are always short, especially when compared to a Mario game, but they traditionally make up for that by providing smooth platforming that's a joy to play over and over. Joy is not a word I would use to describe Sonic Blast. The first and one of the biggest problems is that the character sprites are massive and your field of view is just teeny tiny. This means you can barely see what's going on around you, requiring you to crawl or blindly jump into nothingness. Because of the often blank, solid color backgrounds and the game's affinity for pits, you will often literally be jumping or falling into nothing. I used to have a theory that this game was primarily developed for the Master System's larger frame, and that it was just kind of cut down awkwardly for the Game Gear. But if you spend even a few minutes playing Sonic Blast on the Master System, that theory immediately evaporates. The Master System port is clearly an afterthought at best. It is so haphazardly thrown together that tiny Game Gear-sized frames are just floating in space everywhere, and the wider field of view just completely breaks parts of the game. Check out this fish sprite that normally would be off-screen that's just hanging out when not in use. So clearly, the Game Gear version was first. So what happened? Only the poor souls who were assigned to develop this game with what was likely far too little time and resources know. By the way, those same poor souls aren't even credited in the game's user manual.
We got producer, we got product manager, we got specialist, we got package, we got testers, and thanks, but no developers? Did they take their names off of it? What happened here?
Yep, somehow I still have this manual from when I purchased the game back in '96, and Let me tell you, screenshots have come a long way since then. The field of view issues wouldn't be the end of the world if the levels were fun, but they're not. Level design is a huge leap back from previous Sonic Game Gear games. Unlike Sonic Chaos and Triple Trouble, levels are super linear with only one viable path, and you're punished for trying to explore, often running straight into spikes and the pipes. Gods, for some reason, the worst part of Aspect Sonic games is back and with a vengeance. The second half of this game is almost entirely mazes that can only be solved by guesswork. There are some good things in this game, I guess. I mean, you can choose between playing as Sonic or Knuckles. That's right, you can play as Knuckles in this game. It's easily the best part. You get the whole Knuckles moveset, allowing you to glide and climb up walls, and it's great. About 90% of the reason that I ever fired up this game as a kid was to goof around as Knuckles for a bit in the first level. It's just too bad we can't actually drop him into a game that's fun. Meanwhile, Sonic gets a double jump, which is essential to being able to navigate the later levels of this game. Fun, weird items from Triple Trouble like rocket shoes and vehicles are gone. You'll occasionally see a very basic shield or speed power-up, but it's rare. Overall, there's just very little here that's fun. You just kind of have to brute force your way through levels. When you're hit, you only lose 10 rings at a time, so the game is relatively easy while still managing to be a frustrating slog. But hey, that fancy 3D art, that'll save it, right? That'll make it all worth it. So let's talk about it. The headlining feature of this game is the pre-rendered 3D graphics. And I have to admit, in one sense, the characters look pretty dang good, especially Knuckles. However, on the other hand, the resolution is too low for the sprites to clearly show the detail coming from the 3D models, resulting in some weird artifacts and gray pixels. Also, it seems like only the sprites are truly pre-rendered, while the environments are... not good. The styles don't mesh, making everything look kind of like a tech demo rather than a coherent game. Donkey Kong Land on the Game Boy faced similar struggles with the use of pre-rendered graphics on portable hardware. However, I think Donkey Kong Land manages to stay more consistent, with the levels showing the same level of detail and care as the character models. Now, don't get me wrong, especially on original Game Boy hardware, it's very hard to see what's going on, so it's still not great. Pre-rendered 3D can look amazing on Super Nintendo and PlayStation and other home consoles, but there really isn't a case to be made for portable systems with super limited resolution. While Triple Trouble was the peak of story elements in a Sonic Game Gear game, Blast is the opposite. Levels are random, there's no transition, there's no maps, and even the intro section is kind of just underwhelming, although at least they tried, I guess. The only connecting factor in all of this is that each generic level has a color in the name that sorta corresponds to a Chaos Emerald. Now, speaking of Chaos Emeralds, let's talk about the special stages. If you find a big old ring, you're warped to a special stage where you run forward very slowly and collect rings. It's incredibly difficult to figure out where rings are in pseudo 3D space, and the pace is agonizingly slow. Even worse, you only get Chaos Emeralds when you play these special stages in the second act, so it's a complete waste of time playing them in the first act where you only get an extra life. Adding insult to injury, when you finish the special zone, you're spit out right back at the beginning of the level or the last save point, as if you just died. Green Hill Zone. In 1996, we're only 5 years out from the very first Sonic release ever, and already Sega has run Green Hill Zone into the ground. This is quite possibly the barest interpretation of Green Hill Zone I've ever seen. Palm trees are teeny tiny compared to the giant sprites, and the background is almost entirely solid blue without a cloud in the sky to break it up. And the loops, let's not talk about those loops. The only unique element in this version of the level are these music box things that I don't know. Why are these here? Why do they hurt you? What song are they playing? It feels like they're left over from some completely different game. At least the actual music for this level is pretty good. In fact, the music for this first zone is probably the single best thing about Sonic Blast at all. Just like how Sonic 2 has Sky High Zone, there's just one level with an awesome music track that stands out. I guess this is as good of a place as any to mention that all the bosses in this game are very easy and kind of boring. They all have one attack, you jump on them, rinse, repeat, and then they're dead. and Sonic shakes his finger at the camera as to say, "Shame on you. Shame on you for playing this game." Yellow Desert Zone. Sonic takes a page out of Mario's book by making level 2 a sand level. Now this one hews pretty closely to Sandopolis Zone in Sonic and Knuckles, complete with the second half being inside a temple. It's a pretty low bar to clear, but this is one of the better designed levels in the game, and it looks pretty nice with actual backgrounds featuring clouds, and there's stuff on the walls. Pipe puzzles and random navigation puzzles do make their presence felt here, signaling the beginning of the end of any fun you might be having with this game. Finally, I have no idea what the boss is doing. Is he heating up sand? Like, is the sand too cold inside and he's heating it up? Is it like sand curling? If you know what the heck he's doing, please let me know in the comments. Red Volcano Zone. Red Volcano Zone is purple. This level at least doesn't have a single solid color backdrop, but those textures are very, very repetitive. Red Volcano Zone is a pretty dull level, but you're going to look back fondly once you enter the second half of this game where things start getting real punishing. As for the boss, it takes place in a void while you float on a thing. I don't really know what it is. Blue Marine Zone. Ugh, this level. These levels, the pipes, the water, the randomness, it's all the worst elements of a Game Gear Sonic game whipped into one frothing. Well, I don't want to start edging into the angry video game nerds territory here, but this level is zero fun. You'll have to trial and error your way through pipes, which I guess thankfully restore your oxygen for some reason, all while navigating sluggish water physics. The first levels are so short, and this one is so long, made longer by the brutal trial and error, that easily half your total playtime can end up being in this blue hell. Silver Castle Zone. What's more fun than random pipe puzzles? How about a ton of random teleportation puzzles? That's right, come to Silver Castle Zone and experience the worst of 2D platform level design. I don't have a lot to say about this level because I don't really want to think about it any more than I absolutely have to. The most fun you'll have are pits you fall into whenever the wall comes after you, and you can't properly flee the wall because the camera gets out of sync and blocks your progress. Fun! The final boss is very easy. You just run to move a mirror under Eggman to reflect the shots, beat him, and you get to watch the Death Egg fall into the sea. Wait, Death Egg? You didn't know that was in the game? Didn't you see? Oh wait, there's not a single indication that the Death Egg is even in this game before this moment at the end. But you're done with the game. You're free. The curse is broken. Run. Run while you can.
So, should you play Sonic Blast? Well, I think by now the answer is probably no. It's not an essential game. It's not a super fun platformer. It looks terrible. It doesn't play very well. There's a lot going against it, but keep in mind that back when this came out, I was very aware that this might be the last 2D Sonic game that we were going to get. Like, I didn't know there would be this 2D resurgence coming in the future, that Sonic Mania and games like that would get made. Like, I thought the future was just going to be Dreamcast Sonic 3D games, and that was it. If you enjoyed this series and covering all these games, make sure you subscribe. We're going to cover some portable hardware. We're going to dip over in Nintendo Land, and not the game Nintendo Land, but like the world of Nintendo stuff. We got a lot of new stuff coming. Thanks for watching.